existence, over which Christ, who is sovereign over all, does not cry, mine.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is Politica Christiana. I am your host, C.G. Billiot. This is live stream number 4, provided to you by the Battle and the Bride blog. And here we are again, doing something different. We will get into that in a second, but we are coming at you live on YouTube, X, and now Instagram as well. The Instagram folks will have a different view. I don't know how the sound's going to work out on that, so bear with me. Trying new things out. New things out today. We got a new live stream format for the next couple weeks, at least, as we look at some resources together. Typically, how we've been doing this is announcements, some relevant topic, cultural event, what have you, and then we dive right into like foreign policy. Foreign policy is nuts right now. If you're following anything going on with the war in Ukraine, the continued peace talks in the Middle East, and then there's war about to break out in Central Africa between Burundi and Rwanda. So there's a lot going on in foreign policy, but we're going to take a break from all that. We're going to take a break from the normal show routine and work through together Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt's Realizable Ideas. This is a collection of lectures he gave at Pacific Theological Seminary in 1911. Absolutely fascinating. Now, granted, we'll give some disclaimers about TR here in a second, but that's what we're going to be looking at today and the next couple of weeks. Somebody already in the comments said hashtag Hotel Rwanda. RIP. That is tough. Rwanda's been through so much. Fun fact about Rwanda, I had to do a paper on them in college. They have led developing nations in terms of female representation in government because the genocide kind of took out all the men, so at least it did for a generation or so. So at any rate, let me make sure I have the chat open too so I can see what else is going on. I think I might have just broke my computer. Hopefully you guys are doing okay. I totally just here we go. Okay, all right. So announcements before we get into Realizable Ideas from TR. So we are currently doing a giveaway. We are 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 doing a free giveaway of 3 books, right? We've got Pursuit of Holiness from Jerry Bridges, an original copy, by the way. Like I'm pretty sure it's like a first or second edition. It's very old. We've got 2 books from Doug Wilson. We've got Why Christian Children Need Christian Education. It's very short. You can read it in less than an hour. That's the series is the Answers in an Hour series. And then we've got Angels in the Architecture with him and Doug Jones. So if you are interested in that, make sure you follow us on Instagram and Twitter. Make sure you tag a friend in those respective posts. You subscribe to our YouTube and then comment and done on either X or Instagram, and you will be entered into the drawing. We've done 2 other giveaways so far, and we have I feel like I don't know about you, but there's the conspiracy part of me that's like when people do giveaways, they don't actually give stuff away because you never see who gets the stuff, right? Well, you can go through our feed because we actually tell the people who give stuff to, hey, tell people that you got this stuff from us, and they have so far. So shout out to Mason, and I can't remember who won the first one. I think his name was John, but anyway, not the point. If you're hopping in with us right now, welcome. We are continuing on with announcements before getting on to Realizable Ideas. So thank you guys for hopping in. Let's see what else. The Christiana America flags. If you want one, please let me know. We have 14 left. Man, the comments are already cracking me up. We have 14 of these flags left. So this is the American flag with the Jerusalem cross instead of the Union of Stars. $70 via Venmo. Let me know. DM me via X or Instagram. We have 14 left. So please, before they're gone. And then that being said, repping some of our own merch as well. Let me move the mic for a second. I don't know if I'm gonna be able to. And the other camera, Instagram, they've got a better view. But yeah, our merch is doing well right now too. All the proceeds from this go to supporting the show so we can improve the content, improve research as well, and dedicate more efforts towards you and expanding the kingdom and making these conversations more relevant to the rest of Christendom for the next Christendom. So, and then lastly, before getting on to new content, I wanted to give a shameless plug here. Mentioned it several times on Instagram before. Some of you guys are familiar with this content, but part of the Battle and the Bride blog last year, no, goodness, 2 years ago, it's been a while, we did season 1 of the Doctrines of Grains podcast, which is a podcast dedicated to beer reviews and practical theology, namely the Institutes of Christian Religion. So if you've never read anything from John Calvin, or you're familiar with Calvinism, but haven't actually made your way through the Institutes, literally my buddy Seth and I, we review beer and we walk through the Institutes of the Christian Religion, as well as other relevant topics. And so we're going to be coming out with season 2 here soon. A lot of hard work going into that, a lot of brain melting going into that. So get excited. I don't have a release date for you yet, so I apologize for that. But get excited for that. Sorry, somebody in the chat was asking me about the Jerusalem cross tattoo. Yes, this is a little gold-plated Jerusalem cross tattoo. Tattoo. What am I saying? Necklace. Goodness, I'm not even drinking. It's a Jerusalem cross necklace. Got it from somebody on Etsy. I can't remember who, but whoever they are, they did a fantastic job, and we need more stuff like this. If anyone knows local Christian American companies that would do something like this that for an affordable price, please let me know. That'd be sick to partner with them. But all those things being said, all those wonderful announcements made, 6 minutes in, let's go ahead and hop into the content, which will be again Theodore Roosevelt's Realizable Ideas. These were lectures given at Pacific Theological Seminary in 1911. Really, really fascinating. TR, we did a post for TR on our Instagram and on X for President's Day, was a truly, truly remarkable man. We don't talk about Theodore Roosevelt enough. He was literally one of the most accomplished people who's ever lived. His resume is absolutely ridiculous. The stories of his life are incredible. I would encourage you to research Theodore Roosevelt, research Theodore Roosevelt. That being said, he was not a perfect man. He certainly had his flaws, even in his theology. And scary enough, he was probably a Freemason, and we don't like the Freemasons. Not good. Not good folks. That being said, we can't throw out all of his accomplishments and his intellect and his insight on that merit alone, or else we're going to lose George Washington and a great number of the founders from our country's origins, because so many of them were Freemasons. And that is the conversation for another episode. But for here, just know Theodore Roosevelt's flaws aside, he has valuable things to contribute in these lectures, and we're going to take a look at them together. That was way more concise than I thought it would be, because you guys know that I ramble. But yeah, there's that. I'm going to share it on the screen for those on YouTube and X. If you're on Instagram, I'm so sorry, you're not going to see these, but we're going to literally read through this together. Yeah, so one of the comments in Instagram is pointing out the fact that TR, when he was a young boy, he struggled with asthma. And instead of being coddled, his dad was like, no, you need to be tough. So he intentionally put him in sports to lose and get beat up until eventually the exercise and the confidence literally pushed the asthma out of him. It's a crazy story. He got into boxing, he got into cattle ranching, he got into all big game hunting. He was an absolute unit, and really was an advocate for like austere masculinity. But anyway, we're going to hop into realizable ideals. I keep saying ideas. Realizable ideals, which was which is overall the name given to the lecture series, but it's also the name of the first lecture. So the first lecture, realizable ideals, gracious. And hopefully you guys will see right off the bat why these have use for us today, because I was immediately struck by their practicality, their applicability, particularly for our present situation in Christian politics, for sure. There's a lot of theorizing, philosophizing that happens, theologizing, spiritualizing that happens in Christian politics, and that is needed, especially in our day and age in which there is incredible biblical illiteracy and a lack of intellectual commitment to these kinds of things. So I salute that. But on the other hand, we actually have to get to work at some point in the day. And when we do get to work, we have to have obtainable and attainable goals. And so this is something that Roosevelt is speaking to. Remember, this is in the context of him speaking to a seminary. And he posits this first lecture, Realizable Ideals. So here's TR. And to be fair, really, really incredible. So he gives 5 lectures. He gave them all spontaneously. I forgot what the the technical term is in the speech world. But he gave these were all impromptu. These were not. He had no prepared notes. Extemporaneous. These were all extemporaneous speeches. So he then later wrote down what he remembered that he said, talking with other people there. So this is the written account of those. So here we go. When I was first asked to deliver this course of lectures, I refused just because what I wanted to preach was action. I did not feel that I could preach action in 5 lectures. I finally accepted because it seemed to me admirable a thing for the seminary to have started this kind of lecture course, and so admirable a thing for the founder of the course to have provided for it that I did not feel quite at liberty to refuse. All of our extraordinary material development, our wonderful industrial growth, will go for nothing unless with that growth goes hand in hand the moral, the spiritual growth that will enable us to use aright the other as an instrument. I hesitated some time as to exactly what title to give these lectures I was to deliver because I wanted to use the 2 titles of Applied Ethics and Realizable Ideals. I chose these titles because they seem to me to put into words the only spirit which I think counts for anything in preaching, whether it be a professional or by an amateur. The spirit which regards preaching as worthless unless transmuted into action. So I want to pause there. This is something that, and I'll stop sharing for a second. So this is something that my dad instilled into me at a very young age, and it's almost to a fault. Where, and I think this is a good trait to instill into men, is like if there's no action, then nothing matters. Now that can lead again, that can have some vices, that can fall into some ditches, but like I cannot stand for life of me. And this doesn't have to be like grandiose ideal things about changing civilization for crying out loud. This is just about common everyday things. Sometimes I drive my wife insane because I can't sit still for too long. I feel like I'm not being productive. Um, there's productivity, getting to work, actually doing things says a lot about the character of a man. And so my dad, for example, doesn't possess quote unquote pure theology so far as reformed folk are concerned often. But one thing that no one could ever criticize my dad for is not being a man of action. In fact, he's sometimes a man of too much action, is constantly at work. And so I respect Roosevelt bringing that into the context of, again, he's speaking to a seminary and he's like, hey, I'm glad you guys are hitting the good books and learning systematic theology, but we need to really press on walking with our talking. And it's here that I want to give a shameless plug to. Let me see if I can pull it up. A lot of people don't know this. I talked about it in the post that I did for Instagram. Sorry, I'm searching on the computer right now. That TR had a very, very close relationship with the Navy. At one point, he was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Whilst president, he normalized presidents attending the Army Navy football game. He brought the remains of John Paul Jones, the father of the American Navy, from abroad back to the United States Naval Academy, where the crypt of John Paul Jones is. That totally just reminded me as we're talking about the Navy that, again, my views are my own. This is not the opinion of the DoD or the U.S. Navy. So anyway, moving on from that. So he was a big fan of the Navy. And in fact, even before his time as president, he was like a bestseller, award-winning author over his history of the age of sail, essentially. So big, big Navy guy. And so because of that, his fingerprints are all over the United States Naval Academy. So when you're there, every single student, so every single person, so at any given point, at least in the modern era, you're talking about over 1,000 people a class typically. When you're all going through basic training, you have to memorize his man in the arena speech, or at least the most famous quote from it. So I want to read that to you because I think, aside from, there's already going to be plenty to cover in this in these lectures, and then this, even in this first one, but this quote is just too based. It's just absolutely too based to pass on. And so if you've heard this before, it usually fires you up. Every time I read this quote, I think about this quote, it gets me fired up. It's cringy for people who went to the academy because we all had to memorize it, so it's seen as kind of like a meme. But I absolutely love it. I put it up in my office on my ship. So, the man in the arena. It is not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbled or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and with sweat and with blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, who spends himself in a worthy cause, who at the best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who neither know victory nor defeat. Oh, such an incredible quote. If you get nothing out of this episode, this live stream, the man in the arena, Teddy Roosevelt, the man in the arena, go read that quote, go read that speech. That's the most famous section from it, of course. That quote, man, phenomenal. Anyway, I just had to throw that in there because it resonates with what he's already established so far, realizable ideals, that we have to be people of action, and made that, and Lord help us that our ethics would align with our theology, right? So let me get back to sharing this screen, and we'll get back into the lectures. Here we go. Sorry about that. All right, here we go. Pressing on. If we treat the study of ethics as a mere intellectual diversion, then we probably do ourselves little harm and certainly do ourselves no good. If we conscientiously or carelessly preach ideals which cannot be realized and which do not intend to have realized, then so far from accomplishing a worthy purpose, we actually tend to weaken the morality we ostensibly preach. This was actually Friedrich Nietzsche's criticism of Christianity. He had grown up. A lot of people don't realize this. Now, here's a guy who is the father of nihilism, and was just an absolutely depraved God hater. But a lot of people don't realize he grew up the long time descendant of many, many, many Lutheran ministers. And he one time criticized Christianity by saying that every single Lord's Day we pray, Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, not actually hoping that that were so or working towards that end. He's basically saying we always act like we want to live as heavenly citizens in the earth so that the earth will look more like heaven, but we're not actually working towards that end. And so that seed of doubt, that seed of frustration is what he claimed pushed him eventually to his rampant atheism. Now, I don't, obviously that's not an excuse. That is not an excuse by any means. But there is a kernel of truth there that if Christians in particular are not people who are working towards the ends of the kingdom, only speaking of it, then our morality is essentially useless, is what Roosevelt is arguing. Let me say that again. If we conscientiously or carelessly preach ideals which cannot be realized and which we do not intend to have realized, then so far from accomplishing a worthy purpose, we actually tend to weaken the morality we ostensibly preach. Now, anything I have to say to you during these lectures will derive its whole value from the Spirit in me as I say it, and the Spirit in you as you listen to it. If I preach to you anything which I do not strive with whatever haltings and shortcomings myself to realize, then I am unworthy for you to listen to. And if, on the other hand, you come to listen to me for mere curiosity or to get a little temporary enjoyment, then you would have better stayed at home. I chose as the opening lecture this address on realizable ideals because the longer I have lived, the more strongly I have felt the harm done by practice among so many men keeping their consciences in separate compartments. Sometimes a Sunday conscience and a weekday conscience. Sometimes a conscience as to what they say or what other people like to say, or another conscience as to what they do and like other people to do. Sometimes a conscience for their private affairs and totally different conscience for their business relations. Or again, they may have one compartment in which the man keeps his conscience not only for his domestic affairs, but for his business affairs, and a totally different compartment in which he keeps his conscience when he deals with public men and with public measures. Ooh, let's stop this for a second and really lean in. So stop sharing. We're going to talk. So, man, yeah, Roosevelt there. And if you're on Instagram, again, I apologize that you cannot see the text as we're working through it. But golly, dude, he really strikes a nerve, doesn't he? So I can respect that. I've always respected ministers in particular. And obviously, Roosevelt was not operating the capacity of a ecclesiastical minister, but men who stand before you and say, "Hey, look, not only am I flawed, but also if I'm not doing what I'm about to tell you that you should do, then hold me to it." Additionally, if you're not someone who's actually willing to commit your life to a mission and orient your life around that mission, so that in every walk of life, not these this multiplicity of compartments. Now, granted, men in particular, we do compartmentalize. We compartmentalize different aspects of our life, our business life, our church life, our marriage life, et cetera, et cetera. So there is a natural and good propensity towards that. But what he is critiquing is our tendency to, in each of those spheres, in each of those compartments, to operate towards different ends and to be different people whilst operating in those compartments. That is problematic because it is not, one, it's not efficient, it's not true, and it is not good. Man in particular should be always operating towards the ends of Christ in every walk of life. And this is something that has to captivate him. So this was something that obviously we all need to work on. I know I certainly struggle with these things in in every single one of walks of my life, and so we should always be praying for improvement in that. But this was something that was a huge critique in my life that, no kidding, helped change my life. So my roommate in college, one of them, who is, talk about walking the walk and talking the talk. He's a Navy SEAL, right? He's an absolute stud, and he was always on fire for Christ. And so our sophomore year, we had a come to Jesus moment because he was calling me out for all the stupid things I was doing, and pointing out, amongst all the things that he rightfully pointed out, one of them was that I was, and what Roosevelt's criticizing here, I was um, sinfully creating a multiplicity of personalities and motivations in the compartments of my life, so that I was a different person in one than the other. So I was serving Christ on Wednesdays and Sundays, but then every other day of the week I was living for myself, doing all kinds of sinful and stupid things. Um, and so from that conversation, not only did the Lord start working on me to change, but my prayer for that year is, it was a prayer that changed my life, was like, Christ, please become my obsession. Like, Lord Jesus, become my obsession, that in every walk of life, whether it's in the business world or in relationships or in my occupation, people know that I'm an idiot. I'm a fool for Christ. I am a fool for Christ, like Paul says that he was. That would be something that, amongst my other traits and flaws, people know that that is at least the mission, that is the end that I'm heading towards. And so this is something that Roosevelt is trying to push for here with respect to realizable ideals. If we're ever going to have these ideals, these goals to reach as a society, they had to be really realizable. They had to be obtainable, attainable, but we're only going to be able to do that if we are oriented entirely in our persons and all the compartments of our life towards those ends. So let's keep moving the comments. This man, Jimmy, dude. Jimmy always has the best comments, dude. I love it. All right, let's keep on moving. Oh, I forgot to share it. Let me share this. I always do that. Wrong screen. Okay. Sorry, I was having a boomer moment for a second. Okay, here we go. All right, sorry, I lost my place. That kind of speech does harm, because harm is always done by preaching an ideal which the preacher and the hearer know cannot be followed, which they know it is not intended to have followed. From the hearer confounds all ideals with the false ideal to which he is listening. And because he finds that he is not expected to live up to the doctrine for which he has listened, he concludes that that it is needless to live up to any doctrine at all. Now, I do not mean for a moment that an ideal preached should be a low one. I do not mean for a moment that it is ever possible entirely to realize, even for the very best man or woman, the loftiest ideal. But I do mean that the ideal should not be preached except with sincerity, and that it should be preached in such a fashion as to make possible measurably to approach it. Take the Sunday school address of the type to which I object, of which I have just spoken. If you tell a number of boys who are about to become men and go out to earn their own living, if you tell them to despise the things of the body, to care nothing for material success, you are telling them what you should not want your own boys actually to do. You are telling them what they cannot do unless they are willing to become public charges of what it is not desirable that they should do. To tell them such things in the name of morality is to invite them to despise morality. What is necessary to tell them that their first duty is to earn their own livelihood, to support themselves and those dependent upon them, but that when they should that but that when their first duty has been performed there, yet remains a very large additional duty in the way of service to their neighbor, a service to the rest of mankind. Ooh, okay, I stopped sharing. All right, dude. That's one of the reasons when I read this, because I was working through these various quotes for the TR post that we did on Instagram and X. And when I stumbled upon this lecture and I read that section, I was like, okay, we've got to do a whole series, because there's, again, Roosevelt was not a minister. He was not a perfect man. He had some questionable things in his past, but he's hitting the nail on the head with that one and so many other these points. So let's talk about what he's quote unquote preaching on, right? When we are preaching, when we are teaching, namely the people of God, how they should conduct themselves as the people of God, and we do not give them attainable, realizable ideals, we are failing them. And really, we are failing ourselves. So there's a lot of this which American, particularly modern American evangelicalism, has done by whether it be because of biblical literacy or a lack of uh, intelligent communication of theological ideals, clarity. There's all kinds of unfortunate things that have happened where you have an evangelical culture where people are constantly sitting in their seats hearing these lofty ideals like that he's referring to, and saying to themselves internally, okay, well, I can never do that, so I'm basically going to do my own small version of Christianity where I'm pretty much a nice and good person, and that's enough for me because I've got my heaven card, right? There's that aspect. There's the aspect of the cringy random purity culture that emerged in American evangelicalism about 20 years ago with good intentions, but it produced the opposite outcomes that it sought to do. There was, of course, historically the temperance movement, which also did the same, led to organized crime and bootlegging in the country, which again just contributed to more and more alcoholism that the movement was originally trying to combat. We have a tendency in American evangelicalism to preach ideals that cannot be obtained. And so, as he said, people depart from doctrine altogether, either in their walk and talk, or at least just in their it might not act so for some people that plays out in their hearts and their hands, and for others it doesn't play out in their hands because they still want to be seen as good people. So in their hearts they despise, there's a part of them that despises the lofty ideals that they're constantly told that they know are never reachable. Now granted, for any Christian of any persuasion, any tradition, you should know that yes, the gospel in and of itself is such that the law of God is unobtainable to uh, for us to save ourselves. Like, so let's get that out. That's not what Roosevelt is not trying to say that like, for example, obedience to the law of God is something that can be done apart from Christ. No, that is not what he's saying at all. And there is an aspect where that is true. Yes, we can do no good, no true and ultimate good apart from Christ. Paul is very, very clear about that in Romans. Um, but what he is saying is, as a redeemed people in Christ, as sanctified people, people being sanctified, and we're trying to do the will of God here on earth, we still have to do so in ways that are realizable, hence the whole point of the lecture. So I think there's so much of that um, that that is so applicable to our culture. So I would exhort you, I would recommend to you, I would suggest to you, if you're going to go back and read this lecture for yourself, really, really read that again with modern evangelicalism in your mind, and think of all the ways in which you've experienced that in your own Christian upbringing of being in a pew and hearing something, and you know, like, well, that's either something's wrong here. Either I'm not understanding what you're telling me to do, or you're saying something that no one is actually doing in reality. We say we are, but we're not. But one of the things that he addressed in that little section as well is, I'll go back and read it again because it's so relevant to our times. Is our culture, American evangelicalism for the last 30, 40 years, has not known what to do with young men. We don't know, because we have an effeminate society, and that has made its way into the church. We don't know what to do with young men. Whereas the scriptures say the glory of young men is their strength, we tell young men, stop prioritizing your strength. Whereas scripture exhorts a man who seeks to make a living that can provide for his children and his children's children. The church says stop idolizing money and career. We have not known what to do with young men. So let me read that section again because it's so brilliant, and it is applicable to our times. And this is stuff that ministers still get in trouble. There are people in reform circles who get in trouble for telling young men to prioritize these things. But look at the clarity provided from someone like Roosevelt, right? So take the Sunday school address of the type I object, of which I have just spoken. If you tell a number of boys who are about to become men and go out to earn their own living, if you tell them to despise the things of the body, to care nothing for material success, you are telling them what you would not want for your own boys actually to do. You are telling them what they cannot do unless they are willing to become public charges, which is basically public nuisance, a public burden, and what is not desirable that they should do. To tell them such things in the name of morality is to invite them to despise morality. What is necessary to tell them that their first duty is to earn for themselves their own livelihood, to support themselves, those dependent upon them, but that when their first duty has been performed, there yet remains an additional, and that is way of service to the rest of mankind. Now, I'll stop sharing again. So, it's just the numbers, folks. Like, I'm not making this up. Just go look in the last 40 years. We got to a point now, crazy enough, by God's merciful providence, the tide is somewhat changing in America right now at this moment. But for decades, men, particularly young men, their attendance in churches has plummeted. It has gone down the drain because we don't know what to do with young men. we really criticize them for desiring to be men. And we tell them silly things like what was just said by Roosevelt of stop trying to prioritize your physical fitness, stop trying to prioritize your health, stop trying to prioritize your career. All those things are worldly and they're sinful, or they might be. They might be. You might be making a sin out of them. Meanwhile, we have no problem telling men to soften up, to lean into their feelings, to follow after women. I mean, again, how many times did you grow up where there was a sermon on Mother's Day that was all about the glory of women, and then on a Father's Day sermon about how guys suck and we need to get in line, right? So, we're not making this up here. The numbers bear witness to this. That attendance, church going males, young males, fell for a long, long time. But as of right now, for the first time in a long, long, long time, the numbers are changing, whereas young men are actually going back to church compared to their age range of 18 to 25. The stats are showing this. They're going back to church more so than their female counterparts. Now hold up. The problem, though, is that the quantities are still very, very small, and they're not enough to basically change the window. If anything, it's not even that there's this great surge of young men returning to churches. It's that more and more single women between the ages of 18 and 25 are their numbers of church are starting to drop. So that's not great. It's not great. It's not what we're saying here. But the point is that the effeminate church, the effeminate posture and an effeminate culture has actually, ironically, neither helped women and nor set out to accomplish the goals it's set out to accomplish. And of course, it pushed men out of the church. The low light fog machine church is not keeping men because it doesn't address what men need to hear from the scriptures about what God has charged them to do. And it's not natural to them, right? They can't take it seriously. But if they do, they're pretending. But anyway, sorry, tangent there. But Roosevelt's got a lot of great points. You should go and look at what he had to say. So there is so many great comments right now in the live stream that I will have to come back to those once we get towards the end of this lecture. So I promise we will do that. We'll have time for Q&A at the end. But yeah, I appreciate the comments, guys. Keep them up. All right, back to sharing the screen. But yeah, go and look at what Roosevelt had to say about how we treat young men. But anyway, and also, to be fair to his point, the whole second lecture is just on the family. Roosevelt was a big, 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 big family man. I can't recommend him enough. Go get Alan C. Carlson's The American Way. The entire first chapter is about how Roosevelt almost single-handedly, with his policies geared toward the family, produced the golden era, quote unquote, that you always see, right? The 50s, right? The 50s of the single income home where you could pay off your house in 4 years and put all your kids through college all on one income, right? Like that was only because in the 50s, that was only because of the legwork he did in the early part of the 20th century, him and the maternalist movement. So there's a lot of great stuff there. Go read that book. It's what kind of got me TR pilled. But anyway, again, I've heard men whose lives have been passed chiefly in amassing money preach to boys that money was of no real consequence. Oh man, he had no idea what was going to happen. He had no idea what was going to happen in the 90s and in the 2000s with the megachurch movement. Oh, dude, he had no idea. He'd be so upset. You have these skinny jean wearing, t-shirt, no pulpit, iPad Bible, mega pastors with soft eyes and effeminate glasses telling you stop prioritizing money and they're making millions. So anyway, that's a common Roosevelt dub right there. But anyway, again, I've heard men whose lives have been passed chiefly in amassing money preach to boys that money was of no real consequence, that they ought to disregard it, that it was really entirely unimportant. Well, those men did not in practice believe what they preached. Curiously enough, some of them had for so many years schooled themselves to utter the kind of sentence when they got platform and to act in such a diametrically opposite fashion when they were in the business offices that they had ceased to become conscious of any incongruity. When they got up to speak, they naturally fell into the very vice they represented, the negation of the other vice into which they equally naturally fell as soon as they sat down before the counting desk. Now, it is a false statement, and therefore it is disservice to the cause of morality to tell any man that money does not count. If he has not got it, he will find that it does not count tremendously. If he is worth his salt and is desirous of caring for a mother and sisters, wife and children, he will not find that it counts, but that he will realize that he has acted with infamy and baseness if he has not appreciated the fact that it does count. And of course, when I speak of money, I mean what money stands for. It counts tremendously. No man has any right to the respect of his fellows if through any fault of his own, if he has failed to keep those dependent upon him in reasonable comfort. It is his duty not to despise money. It is his duty to regard money up to the point where his wife and children and any other people dependent upon him have food, clothing, shelter, decent surroundings, the chance for the children to get a decent education, the chance for the children to train themselves to do their life work aright, a chance for wife and children to get a reasonable relaxation. Okay, I gotta. We have to lean into that. Okay, because we're doing decent on time, 36 minutes, right? Golly, dude, on fire. Roosevelt on fire, dude. Because there has been a movement, and he could not have anticipated how bad this got. There have been decades now of American evangelical culture that have told men that if you're prioritizing such things, you're either in sin or probably in sin, which is hilarious because the scriptures tell us directly, 1 Timothy 5:8, that if a man does not provide for his own household, he is worse than an unbeliever. Let me say that again. 1 Timothy 5:8. If a man does not provide for his own household, he is worse than an unbeliever. Now, because the concerned crowd, the discernment crowd, would critique Roosevelt there, and they would say, well, it almost sounds like he's saying the measure of a man is how he provides for his family. But in reality, the measure of a man is how much he loves Christ. Yes, that is true. That is true. Roosevelt is not scapegoating that. He's not lessening that, but he's also saying he's also saying that the measure of a man so far as his natural and earthly inclinations reflect is that he provides for his family. Because if a man truly does love Christ supremely, as the highest of his ordo amoris, right? At the highest of his ordered loves, if he loves Christ over everything, he will obey the words of Christ as revealed in the scriptures, as breathed by the Holy Spirit, that he is to provide for his family lest he be worse than an unbeliever. So there's no Jesus juking the reality that men, we have to care about provision for those who depend upon us, because we used to live in a world where men took pride in assuming responsibility for those being dependent upon them. But now we live in this myth as if people aren't dependent on anyone else except the state, apparently. But that's a facade. We are dependent upon one another in varying degrees, depending upon the order of our relation and the hierarchy of relations that God has created. And men in particular have to take responsibility so that people can depend on us, namely our loved ones, charged to us, hopefully a wife and children. But this is the absence of that has not only led to just chaos, but it also leads to things which would not which are not God honoring. It's not God honoring that we shove our seniors, our grandparents, our parents, that we just shut them up in basically cubicles called hospice or senior adult living and forget about them and let the state or let subsidized corporations from the state take care of them. Like that's not in the biblical order. We're to honor our father and mother and take care of them ourselves. That's a hot take. And it flies in the face of things like Social Security, Medicaid, Medicare. But guess what? Like that's what Christians believe for a long, long time. It's not God honoring that we incentivize women in impoverished areas via state policies to remain single and keep having babies so that they can get higher rates of welfare and other benefits. That's not God honoring. George Gilder writes a lot about that in Men in Marriage. There's a great chapter on that. You should go look at that. But there are things about provision that if we just leaned into what a good theology of provision is from men to their families, man, we could fix a lot in our society. And these are actually realizable ideals. Like, I love that Roosevelt is grounding so much of his logic in these kind of metaphors. Like, so he's talking about we need to prioritize things we can actually act on and get to work on them. And he's rooting that a lot of that with not just the individual but the family, because I'm of the persuasion that if we see things through the lens of the family, for culture, for the church, for politics, so many things would be simplified, because so much of what we experience in a family is of natural instinct, no matter where you're from at on the planet, and there it's so analogous. Like, we can understand policy and structure in light of the family. But anyway, I digress. Let's get back into Roosevelt. Hopefully that wasn't too much gabbing for you guys, rambling. So here we go. Now, practically, as regard his or own family, I doubt there is anyone here who would deny that proposition. It is obvious that it seems needless to put it before you. And yet, how often do we listen to a man on a platform like this saying, because it is a conventional thing to say, quote, pay no heed to money? Now, of course, when such a preacher says, pay no heed to money, his hearers at once accept what he is about to say further as insincere. And, whether they pay heed to money or not, they pay no further heed to what he says about it. It is not a realizable ideal to, quote, pay no heed to money. You must pay heed up to the point I have indicated, but it is a realizable ideal after you have once reached that point to understand that money is merely a means to an end, and that if you make it the end instead of a means, you do little good to yourself and a curse to everybody else. It is a realizable ideal to make people understand that while it is their first duty to pull their own weight in the world, yet that after have achieved a certain amount of prosperity, both their capacity for usefulness toward others and their capacity for enjoyment depends infinitely more on other things than upon possessing additional money. Now, the very fact I grant in the fullest degree the need of having enough money, which seems the need of sufficient material achievement to enable you and those dependent upon you to lead their lives healthy and under decent conditions, the very fact that I grant this as an essential first need to meet entitles me to have you accept what I say at its face value, when I add that this represents only the beginning, and that after you have reached this point, your worth as a unit in the commonwealth, your worth to others, and worth to yourself depends infinitely less upon having additional money than it does that depends on possessing certain other things, things of the soul and spirit. I could not overstate the grinding misery, the heartbreaking misery I have seen come to the family where the man is unable quite to do what he ought for those who depend upon him. But after the man and the woman have reached the point where they have a home in which the elemental needs are met, and where in addition they have accumulated a comparatively small amount of money necessary to meet the primal needs of the spirit and of the intellect, after this point is reached, it is my deliberate judgment that money, instead of being the prime factor, is one of minor factors, both in its usefulness and happiness. Always keep in mind my first proviso. I am not going to repeat it to you as to the necessity of having money, but go beyond that. For beyond that, the difference between the multimillionaire and the man of very moderate fortune is in the vast majority of cases really a difference of appearance and not of reality as regards both usefulness and happiness. The chief harm that the multimillionaire does, in my mind, comes not in his joining with others to make a trust, although when he does, I will try to regulate him. You have to understand the historical context. He was the trust buster. And it is not, in fact, that in him, as in other men here, as Abraham Lincoln put it, a deal of human nature, so that he is sometimes very good and sometimes not good at all. It is he that is apt to give rest uh, of us a thoroughly false ideal. The worst ill that can befall us is to have our own souls corrupted, and it is a debasing thing for a nation to choose as its heroes the men who are of mere wealth. Whew, okay, so that was a pretty big section. I did a lot of reading there. Sorry, folks. Let's talk about that, and we'll probably do questions here soon because we got about 15 minutes left. Maybe I'll do like 5 more minutes to read. But wow. Okay, so a lot there. And again, there's so much that he didn't know what was going to happen in the rest of the 20th century and the 21st. He ends there with saying that our heroes cannot be those who merely possess wealth. And unfortunately, in the quote unquote American dream, we eventually did just that. A lot of our heroes are really people of no skill or virtue. They just have a lot of money. Now, sometimes that's for better or for worse. I think Elon Musk is doing a lot of good things in government right now, but at the end of the day, think about how many people in your life, whether they be professional athletes, whether they be musicians, we give a lot of salt, we give a lot of time, airtime to people who, at the end of the day, if they didn't have that wealth, we probably wouldn't matter. We probably wouldn't care a hill of beans about them, but we do because they have wealth. And so Roosevelt is critiquing that. He's also critiquing this idea that if you have, on the other hand, that if you have a lot of money, you just might, you must just only care about that. It's like, no, you can have a balanced and virtuous life with a little money or a lot. So anyway, I thought that was some good stuff there. But at the end of the day, what he was also saying earlier on that in that section was that he's talking a lot about money right now, not because he's trying to give you financial advice, but because in something like the pursuit of wealth, you can see what realizable ideals look like, where money itself is a realizable ideal as a means, not an end. The end cannot be the pursuit of wealth. It has to be a mean. The pursuit of wealth for what? And he's saying the family, that is the end, or society, that is the end, or the nation, that is the end. And so money, the conversation about money is a way to illustrate what realizable ideals look like. So let's get back into realizable ideals. Ideals. Goodness, I like having a stroke every time I'm having to say that. So we've got, what time are we at? Well, I'll do 5 more minutes of reading and we'll do 10 minutes of question and conversation. So I remember a number of years ago seeing a pleasant and very happy little community was very nearly ruined, and as regards many of the families completely ruined, became an entirely amiable multimillionaire moved into the neighborhood. I really think that his amiability and his perfectly sincere desire to be pleasant with everyone was one of the cause of the mischief. I know, for instance, a very nice woman there with uh, with a charming little house who, having been asked to dinner at the very gorgeous mansion of the worthy soul of many millions, naturally wished to entertain him and his wife in return. But alas, she was also perfectly wretched when it actually came to entertaining to them in that house. She was not willing to have the hired girl wait on the table. She had to have a butler, and then she had to live up to the butler. And the funny thing was, instead of giving the multimillionaire a perfectly pleasant time in her own fashion, which she could have done, she merely gave him a dreary 10th rate imitation of his own feasts. Instead of putting herself in a totally different class, so that there could be no competition between them at all, she insisted on competing in a class where she was certain to get the worst of it. After 2 or 3 years in the millionaire's residence in the neighborhood, there were not a few families who suffered either some permanent damage or grave temporary discomfort, not from the fault of the millionaire, but because they themselves had been foolish. Now, I do not want to preach against the millionaire, but I do want to preach against us as if we let him make us spoil ourselves. That's all. Now, that's a really interesting perspective. I've never been rich, and I haven't really known too many rich people. I don't know about you, but I can see where he's coming from. Where people who, when they can just sniff wealth, when they get close to it, they start acting all kinds of different, and it makes us look like the fools, not the ones who we characterize as fools merely because they have wealth. Um, I wish us to understand better than we do now what are the real things and what are the artificial things of life. I wish to us, sorry, I was looking at the time. We got 3 minutes. Wish us to get a better perspective. Take even the average educational institution. If a very wealthy man visits it altogether, too many of the boys look at him with eager interest, as a man that has had just the career that they intend to emulate. And altogether, too many of the girls think that they would like to marry into his class. Now, in that case, I do not blame him at all. I think it merely adds to our sin, to our iniquity, if we blame him instead of ourselves for the feelings, not that he has about us, but that we have about him. But I do blame ourselves. I blame us if we do not have a proper sense of perspective, if we fail to pay honor to the people who are entitled to it. I do not wonder with a great I do not wonder that many men make of money getting their one ideal when so many of their fellow countrymen treat success in making money as the chief kind of success. When America's history is written, when the history of the last century in America is written for 100 years hence, the name of no multimillionaire who is nothing but a multimillionaire will appear in the history, unless it appears in some footnote to illustrate some queer vagary or extravagance. The men who will loom large in our history are the men of real achievement, of the kind that counts. You can Go over them, statesmen, soldiers, wise philanthropists. I wish to underscore the word wise for philanthropist, who is really worth calling, such as the man who tries to make his use of philanthropy, as to provide against the need of philanthropy in the future. Just as the real worker in charity is the worker who does his best to bring about the conditions in which charity shall not be necessary. The statesman, the writer, the man of science, of letters, of art, these are the men who will leave their mark on history. Man, okay, we will stop there for the evening and finish that next week. But dang, dude, a lot of great stuff there at the end. So again, there are definitely different traditions in American Christianity that would have you villainize and hate not just people of wealth, but anyone of higher stature than you. I mean, that's part of one of the whole elements of critical race theory and of cultural Marxism, right? Is to just hate the man who has more than you, whether it be materially or with talent. And he's saying, stop, don't do that. He is simply saying, stop doing that. That's called envy, and it makes a fool out of you. And it's also illogical in the sense that that is not what true men of value and virtue are going to be remembered for. And for that point, he's actually right. Now, it for us lowly folk who again have never had money, it's easy to think that the Rockefellers of the world, of the Vanderbilts, who we remember, who we're taught about, that they are merely remembered for their wealth. And that's not true. And I know that's not true because at this moment, nobody can look me in the eye and tell me the top 10 richest people in the world without having to go to Google. You might be able to name three of them because they're doing other things for the world than besides their wealth: Bezos, Musk, somebody else, right? But there are plenty of billionaires that you don't know about right now and that you haven't known through history, because there is a difference, to Roosevelt's point, between someone who has a lot versus someone who does a lot with what they have. And so people like Rockefeller or Vanderbilt, for better or for worse, in my opinion, probably not the greatest of guys. They did things though that shook nations, that shook societies, and so for that reason, that's why they're remembered, for better or for worse. Now, what this means for us as Christians as we pursue quote unquote realizable ideals is by prioritizing, again, not wealth or not mere material, but the acquisition of such things to make a difference, to actually accomplish things for society, for the nation, etc. Uh, Instead of merely accomplishing things for ourselves, as part of the plumb line he's also speaking to in this lecture. So, that is your introduction to Teddy Roosevelt's Realizable Ideals, lecture number 1 of the same title. We're about, I think, 3/4 of the way through it there. But I also love what he said there at the end, before I get to the questions and comments, of the true virtuous worker of charity or philanthropy is someone who is working to end it. That is so powerful and profound because there's so many problems with different socialistic tendencies, or this idea of perpetually giving the man the fish instead of teaching him how to fish. That no, like what the Bible would teach us is that yes, you should be generous and charitable to the end that people learn how to provide and take care of themselves. Now, there will always be poor among you, Christ tells us, but that doesn't mean that they won't be able to have their needs provided to for them or be able to provide for themselves. And so we have to work towards those ends, even if we don't see them. These are at least the virtues which should govern us. So I appreciated him saying that, but it also speaks to other issues. So, for example, there's a lot of controversy right now in the Reformed world over the abuses and, quite frankly, sins of the quote unquote pro life establishment versus abortion abolitionists. Now, granted, abortion abolitionists, some of them have their own warts and unhelpful things, but at the end of the day, the spirit of what they're trying to accomplish is more than true. And they rightfully point out that the pro lifers, many of them, live in utter hypocrisy because they have had ample opportunity now in many states to legitimately end abortion. But because of rhetoric, because of emotion, they have not done so. Because the last thing we want to do in this world is accuse a woman of anything, let alone murder, when she specifically chooses to murder her own child. Those are the things which, if they were truly pro-life, as Roosevelt is positing here, if they were truly charitable as charity workers, if these people were truly pro-life as pro-lifers, they would do whatever it takes to end abortion. In the same way that a charity worker would do whatever they could to end the need for giving charity is what Roosevelt's speaking to there. So a lot of great stuff in this lecture to ping pong ball off of and to apply in our own lives, and that's specifically why I wanted to read them with you guys, for you guys. And you can find that. That's literally just search Internet Archive. Um, Roosevelt's Realizable Ideals. Again, he gave these to the Pacific Theological Seminary in 1911. They're phenomenal, and we're going to be working through them in the next couple of weeks. So, all those things being said, 55 minutes in, just about, let's take a look at the comments and questions and all that jazz. So, if anyone has any questions, now is the time to ask. Now is your chance to ask. So, let me go all the way back to the start. Yeah, this man, Jimmy, like the one man army in the comments, just tearing it up. So, I appreciate that, Jimmy. Let's see. Calvinist jokes, those are always relevant. Let's see. Let's see. Had some good old boys in the chat. Trying to see. Oh yeah, he totally. So I forgot to mention this. If you didn't know this story, uh, there was a crazy. I believe it was the 19. Oh, what year was it? Roosevelt. I was trying. So a lot of people don't realize he was the vice president under McKinley before McKinley got shot. Then he becomes president. Later, he tried to run again, but there was a whole. It was complicated. He was running, I believe, not only against Woodrow Wilson, but I believe against Taft. I think I have that correct. And the Republicans were split. So Roosevelt basically formed his own party called the Bull Moose Party, and that got its name from the fact that he was giving a speech and literally got shot in the chest. Not only survived, but kept giving the speech in which he said, you're gonna need a whole lot more than that to take down this bull moose," and thus the Bull Moose Party was born. So absolutely wild, but that's another reason why you should look into the life of Theodore Roosevelt. Let's see. Looking at the comments, wondering if there's any questions. Anybody got any questions? Had a lot of good friends hop in the chat today. Pretty awesome. All right. I think that's it was William Howard Taft. Very well. I'm pretty sure that is it, folks. I do not see any questions. Fire them off if you have them. Fire off any questions you may have on any topic. Doesn't have to be about what we talked about tonight. Now's your chance. I've got 4 minutes here to address questions. If not, I'll reiterate the announcements, and I thank you for sticking around with us in this one. I hope you enjoy it. Give me feedback on this model, right? Going reading through this lecture with you guys, if you guys enjoyed it. Other recommendations outside of Roosevelt's, like in other words, if there's another American politician or pastor who you think has writings that we need to be reading right now from old, recommend them. We'll go through them on the live streams. Um, but as for the announcements, again, shoot a question off if you have it. You're in the chat. Um, but announcements. So again, if you want a Christiana America flag, reach out to me via Twitter or Instagram. If you don't know about our merch, literally click on our links in any of those platforms, and you'll see all kinds of merch. We've got stickers, magnets, T-shirts, hoodies, tank tops, you name it. And then stay tuned for Doctrines and Grains season 2. So that's reiterating all of those announcements. Let's Jimmy. Jimmy, is this a serious question? So my boy Jimmy, I don't know if this is a serious question, but I'll address it. So he said, "Should I follow CRT as a white man?" I'll do you one better. No one, regardless of their race, should follow critical race theory. Should adhere to it. So kind of wild, but critical race theory, if you're not familiar, you should look into the Frankfurt School. Vodi Bachman's got a great book on this, Fault Lines of Social Justice, where critical race theory is essentially the extension of Marxist thought. So it's often called cultural Marxism, in which persons are seen as not merely the noble savage like Rousseau had posited, but we are beasts that are essentially dictated by our demographics, and that the more, and because there's always an oppressor oppressed distinction between groups of people, the more oppressed you are in your demographics and your layers of, of demographics and what they call intersectionality, you are entitled to more power and voice in civil society because you are the quote unquote most oppressed. So if you're not familiar with any of that, Vodi Bakum explains that very well in that book. There's plenty of Christian content combating that, and of course, the tide is turning in the federal government to oppose CRT ideals. But if you're not familiar with it, you gotta get caught up with that. It's 2025. Just know that it's dumb, it's stupid, it sucks, it's not true, it's anti-biblical, and it's ahistorical. So, um, anyway, uh, next stream. So asking about when's the next stream? Next stream Wednesdays. Wednesdays we're always doing our live streams, so stay tuned for those. But I think that's gonna do it, folks. We are at an hour, so I appreciate your time. Thank you so much for hopping in, and yeah, this has been Politica Christiana. Crush the serpent, take dominion, make disciples. Have a good one.